Mark, are you on?
I'm on neither.
Neither. Just a friendly board member. Mark Diller and Cindy Cardinal, who is on planning, and Roberta Sema, who's our president and chair. So we have on our agenda tonight a few items. Number one, we will be discussing the new mandatory route through Riverside Park, including all the safety concerns surrounding the new route. We did have a presentation scheduled for one of our other committee members, Jennifer Nitsky, to talk about best practices in playground design. She is no longer available this evening, so we are going to be moving that agenda item most likely to September. And then any updates on new discussions and new business from us. So I'd like to start off by just kind of laying some friendly ground rules here tonight. Again, this is a very controversial issue. It's been controversial. We would like to maintain a very warm and collegial environment here because we're all on the same side of the coin, right? Safety first, and that's what we want to maintain here tonight is that lens. So if we can all take turns in asking questions, I'm going to be taking minutes. I don't know all of you. I'm happy to meet all of you afterwards, would love that. But in the meantime, can you please state your first and last name, spell out your last name if it is any difficult, if it's more difficult than Smith, please. I'd also like to say that we have representing Parks here, John Harrell. Thank you so much for being here this evening. It really means a lot to come at, at a short notice to be prepared to hear from the community. I'm going to have Ken begin. He'd like to share a little history about this bike route and how this has all come to be. And then what we're going to do, John has answers to some questions that the committee has asked the previous two committee meetings. So we are going to give him the opportunity to answer our questions and concerns first. Then we're going to open up questions and comments to the community. We will have a chance to respond. And then the committee will close with any further questions that have not been answered. Okay, we're all on the same page? Yes, good, nods, great. All right, thank you so much. Ken, would you like to start? Awesome, thank you.
I assume everybody was here for the playground discussion, so sorry to disappoint you. I just want to mention that John Harrell is the administrator of Riverside Park, and we also we have Marisa Mack from Councilmember Helen Rosenthal's office. Mike? Sorry,
It's like McLean.
But also with the Parks Department. And Matt. Hi. Sorry. Anybody else? So I just wanted to give a little bit of background. This new route came about, had its origins about 5 years ago, when it was suggested that something be done about conflicts between pedestrians and cyclists on the waterfront route on the Hudson River Greenway, approximately between 72nd and 83rd Streets. It was, this was in 2015 was the first year that Councilmember Rosenthal did participatory budgeting, and it was suggested that maybe this could be part of that, and that's where residents of the community district vote on what they think the council member should spend, approximately $1 million, and that $1 million is carved up usually about 4 or 5 different ways, so there are 4 or 5 different projects. And suggested that this might be one of those projects. So the original idea was simply to better separate cyclists from pedestrians. along the waterfront route. And then John had the idea of this alternate route, which is now in place, and that some of the money, it was unclear whether some of the money, all the money would be spent on creating an alternate route for cyclists. And it was my understanding that that would be sort of a safety valve. It would be when conditions were crowded or seasonal, or something like that. It certainly wouldn't be all the time. But so, and when it was presented to people to vote on, all people were, as part of the participatory budget and ballot, all people were voting on was separation of cyclists from pedestrians on the hiking river green. Basically. So anyway, it came in second out of 5, or out of I think 15 or so items. So it definitely won money, and it was eventually allocated $200,000. Approximately 30% of that $200,000, or any money that is allocated, goes to administrative costs. So effectively, that gave the Parks Department $140,000 labor to work with to make changes to this alternative path, which they decided they were going to spend all the money on, just on the alternative path. And then we had a community board meeting about 2 years ago, and there was an eventual vote on whether 2016. That makes it 2 years. There was an eventual vote, and the vote was to make it was very, I think it was passed by one vote, was to make there was a question as to whether the new route should be seasonal or it should be all year round. And by one vote, there was a little dispute about the vote, but it passed that it would be year round.
Sorry, I just, first the committee was for one vote.
The committee was for one vote. So it takes a number of years for this stuff to actually take effect. There were some questions about whether it was a capital budget item or operational budget, and those were worked out. So finally, a little bit less than a month ago, it actually went into effect. And there are barriers on the waterfront path, as any cyclist knows, and any pedestrian knows. And cyclists are banned from the waterfront path, and cyclists take this alternative. So that's the background.
So now we're going to move to John, who has
Yes.
questions and answers prepared. Laurie, do you have a question before we move on?
No, I have something to add to what Kim said.
Awesome, great, let's add.
It was quite a contentious and lengthy meeting at the full board where it was, as Kim said, decided to, board endorsed having this path be year round, but one other element of it was basically to give it a look back after 2 years.
Right.
So that, now that is now going to get sort of, the 2 years, how you measure it and when is going to get a little bollocksed up in the rotunda renovation, which apparently will make the whole path unusable. It's not enough of it to make it effectively unusable if the rotunda renovation proceeds. But in any event, that was part of what the full board decided, was to make it year round, to follow the route and the scope of work that the Parks Department was presenting with regard to the limited amount of money they had to spend on this, but with a 2-year look back and evaluation. Is that right?
That's right. Good. So, John, did you?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. I just want to add one thing to your history.
Yeah.
It all began with the concern for everyone's safety.
That's right.
And it still is a concern for everyone's safety, pedestrians,
Can you speak
cyclists.
up a bit?
I will do my best to speak up. Okay, thank you, Roberta. What I said was I added a prequel to Dan's comments. It all began with the concern for safety, everyone's safety, pedestrian safety, cycling safety, and it remains that today. So that's where we are.
So John, I think what's
Yes.
gonna be helpful, maybe I'll state the
Okay.
question that we had and we can do answers, so you're not doing both. Does
I'm not
that
reading
make
the
sense?
questions. Sure.
All right, great. So we had one question for John. The first question, I'll read out loud. If you can't hear me, please let me know. There are grave concerns and already multiple incidents of passenger vehicles using the path to drop off passengers. What is your solution to prevent a serious accident from happening involving unauthorized vehicles along the path? Is it possible to install a no vehicle sign ASAP? What about using cones, stanchions, etc.?
Sure. No one should be driving in there to drop off passengers. The only people who should be driving in there are Parks Department, police, Con Edison, people making deliveries to the restaurant occasionally. There is a sign at the entrance that is a universal DOT sign, do not enter. I'm talking with DOT about, since they're really the experts on transportation signage, talking with them about what we can do to beef that up. It's certainly a concern. If we need to try enforcement, we can, but it's kind of hard. It's such a random occurrence. It's kind of hard to just sit there all the time waiting for someone to drive in.
John, what about the second part of that question about putting up any cones or stanchions or anything else that would be a barrier to entry?
We certainly could try it, but I don't, just as a practical matter, I don't think it will last because I think people will move them. But we certainly could put a cone out there and see what happens. But I'm not optimistic that it will have a real effect.
What about signage, like authorized vehicles only?
Well, as I said, there's already a sign that says "Do not enter."
And he said he was going to be consulting with the Okay. Okay, so if we can hold our comments, I want to get through with you because we have answers coming. So at number 2, the icons for pedestrian and cyclist signage are not large or prominent enough. Is there a way to enlarge the signage or use different colors to denote a shared path so that people walking know they are interacting with cyclists and vice versa?
Yes. We are in the process of fabricating a traffic yellow sign. I believe it says caution, shared path, words to that effect. It's very concise. It's not a lot of wording. And we will put these all along the length of it.
And John, can you share where, do you have like a number that they're going to be that you're producing? Do you have an idea of like where it's going to start? I know it's a bit in depth right now, but just to have some indication of where these would be located.
Well, certainly at each end and throughout. Beyond that, but that's as best I can give you.
Okay. And you follow
And there's a shared path, you said,
caution, shared path.
Yes.
and a symbol of a bike or?
I don't think it has a symbol of a bike. No.
People are gonna know what shared path is.
There are icons that have a bike and that have people walking.
Well, remember there are pavement markings as well with bicycles and pedestrians.
Is it regarding this question? Yes. Okay, I just want to keep comments like minimal also so that we can
Question
ask.
about the question.
Okay.
The question of the question is, I can't figure out what the question is asking, because the whole idea of this path is it's a separate bike path. So what is shared? What are you
It's
trying
not
to
a separate
convey?
bike path.
No, well, wait, the bikes must use it.
Right.
Is the idea of this shared path thing that pedestrians will also use the inland route? Is that what you're telling people? Is that
Point of
what
order.
these signs are about?
Point of order, the decision that you guys made designated that shared and that it was not bicycles allowed by the river, so that was something that you guys decided on.
Well, I don't think that's a point of order, but I'm trying to find out what the
I think
question
it's a
is.
point of order.
Okay, sorry, we are getting off track. No, we have specific ways of going about this meeting tonight to curb going off track, right, Ken? So I want to make sure Clary's question is being answered. So, Roberta, if you have
Yes.
an answer to her
So
question.
it was always the intent that this inland bike path would also be used by people that need to access to different points within the park. But it would not be on the Esplanade where there were just too much chaos. But it was always planned as a joint, both pedestrians coming into and getting out of the park need to access some of these routes.
Well, I don't think that answers my question, which is what does this question mean to ask? And when you, signs that say shared path, is that intended to say that the inland bike route is a shared path? Is that
Yes.
what you're trying to designate?
Yes, that's what I just said.
Clary, is that it for that question?
That's what I
Great,
just said.
okay. John, if we can move on to the third question. There are places along the route where tree roots and bumps are popping up. These pose serious dangers to bike riders. What is the solution for fixing and maintaining these in short and the long term?
Yes, the funding that Ken referred to, the participatory budget funding, was used as far as we could stretch it to repave this route. There are some areas that we couldn't get to, and where the asphalt is imperfect, we're looking at what we can do in-house, whether that's patching or what we can do. We don't have funding to have a contractor come in and repave it, but this isn't unique to that stretch of the park either. So we're looking to see what we can do in-house.
So I know from the last meeting that there was a discussion about spray painting certain areas that were like considerably dangerous, like more dangerous than others. Has that already happened? Like that between June and now?
No, not to my knowledge, no.
Number 4, ambulances and emergency personnel are not aware of how to access the path. What is the best way to communicate to them where and how to enter if necessary? Is there appropriate signage in place? Is it coming? Is the 311 system aware of the new bike path?
I take it you mean 911. It's a part of a much larger conversation. The 911 system is not that precise regarding parks anywhere. If anyone wants to know where to direct an ambulance for this particular area, the best route in is the 79th Street traffic circle, and then to the north or the south, depending on what the situation is. But that level of detail is just not in the 911 system.
But speaking about signage that would be able to direct them in the vicinity, is there something that could
Well,
serve as a guide or denote?
The same issue applies to playgrounds and ball fields and anything else in the park. So it's not unique to the bike path.
To answer that, we've asked Do It and we've asked Beta NYC to look into it. I know your office and I know Gail's office has been trying to get a system where 911 can know where locations are, and so far they haven't come up with it.
Well, you can describe the locations, and that's
Right.
fine. The problem was sometimes when you're calling along the water, the calls were bumping
Into Jersey.
So they're not doing that anymore, thankfully. That's been about 1.5 to 2 years since that improvement has been made. But you need to describe where you are in the park, and then they can find it.
Number 5, John, will you be able to tell the committee tonight how many incidents involving cyclists and or pedestrians have required the involvement of emergency medical personnel since the path opened to regular cycling?
I can only tell you what I'm aware of. We don't know about everything that happens. But since the path was designated, I only know of one incident on that path. During the same time period, I'm aware of a total, including that one, of 8 incidents throughout the entire 6 miles of Riverside Park. Roughly half of them were collisions between bicycles, and the other half were people falling off their bikes. Obviously, anything that happens is a great concern, but it's not unique to that area.
So 1 on the actual path we're discussing tonight, and then a total of 8 throughout the entire 6 miles. Is that, just for my notes, is that correct?
That I am aware of.
That you're
Yes,
aware of.
those are the numbers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Was the one you know about the head-on collision between 2 cyclists at the base of the 79th Street?
I believe we're talking about the same one, yes.
What's the time period for the 8?
Same time period. Well, since the bike path, since this reroute was set up.
Thank you. And if we can hold all questions, very good question. Thank you. I've included it in my minutes, but if we can hold for the end, that would be great. Thank you so much. John, moving on. Are there plans to remedy the directional confusion for cyclists referenced in our June 21st email to you, specifically for southbound cyclists, immediately after the steep downhill from the 79th Street Rotunda traffic circle, and for cyclists traveling north, the section of the bypass enclosed with inflexible bollards that skirts the traffic circle at 79th Street? In this latter area, signage for northbound cyclists is scant, and based on 1 hour of observation by one on our committee, most northbound cyclists are riding on the wrong side of the flexible bollards.
So there are 2 different parts to this. As far as the southbound, we're not seeing that confusion. There may have been an initial adjustment period, but I'm not seeing it. We're not seeing it. As far as the crossover on the top, we certainly can look at additional markings. As I said, we're out of funding, but we can certainly look at additional pavement markings or something that might help. We're certainly open to that. We just don't have funding for it.
If you don't have funding for it, and you're looking at it, you see that it probably is needed, can you apply for funding?
Yes, the same process as any other, yes.
So it could take a while.
Yes.
I'm sorry, maybe I can just, because I have some answers to the funding.
Sure.
So we do have Parks Equity Initiative funding available to us, so we can help supplement some of the smaller cost items like markings and stuff. And that is not capital funds, that's expense funds, so that turns around much more quickly.
Thank you for adding that.
Thank you.
All right, sorry, I'm testing my words per minute here, so bear with me. Are there any plans to improve signage at the southern end of the new path to indicate to both cyclists and pedestrians that a sometimes dedicated bike path is beginning?
I think I can answer that, but I'm not sure precisely what location you're referring to.
How is it? What's the question?
It's the southern end of the.
Yeah, at 72nd Street where cyclists going north make the sharp right turn.
So signage so that
a big sign there so that pedestrians and cyclists know that this is right now we have these bollards, and I think pedestrians are supposed to walk on the right as you're going north, and
Toward the
cyclists go
staircase.
towards the staircase, and cyclists are on the left, but seems unclear to a lot of people.
Who are the people and what are they doing? I'm not
I
trying to
think
be.
pedestrians are walking in the bike lane a lot, and also the bike lane is quite narrow in my experience there. But I don't know whether that's fixable. But pedestrians are walking in the bike lane.
It isn't really a bike lane. The bollards are for people who come down the stairs to alert them that there are bicycles on that path, and to encourage them to keep to, if you're walking west, to keep to the left. That is a good place where we would put these shared path signs though.
Well, I'm talking about right at the junction of the new bike route and the riverfront path, right there.
Well, it is a shared path all the way down to 70th Street.
Mhm. But there's a section, I think, with a bike icon, and then there are bollards, and then there's a section to the right. So clearly you're intending to separate users.
We're intending to protect pedestrians, is what we're trying to do.
Maybe one part of protecting pedestrians is to warn them that they should not be in the area where the bike icon is.
Except that if you're going to the ball field, you're going to the track, you would walk that way.
You'd walk that way, but wouldn't you walk on the right side of the
But
bollard?
the bollards only go to the stairs.
Right, but at least that section.
We can take a look at it, but it is a shared path. It's not a bike lane.
John, we have one final question on here, and then we have two more that are not on this list that came in late. What are the Parks Department's plans for winter days and nights when there is snow and ice on the path? Will cyclists be allowed to use the riverfront path as a safer alternative?
As of right now, there isn't any plan to change anything.
Will the path be, the path we're talking about be plowed?
Of course,
The same diligence as the riverfront path? And isn't it harder to plow a path that has a steep grade?
No.
No? And, okay, we can talk about this one. I'll just ask you don't have any concerns about cyclists riding this, going downhill when there's ice?
there could be ice anywhere.
Ice can be more dangerous when you're going downhill.
It would be treated like any other part of the park.
All right, Roberta, there were two more that came in regarding pedestrian
Right.
safety specifically.
Okay, the one I think they've answered, which was the ball field, you're changing the entrance down there.
Yes, we are going to direct the leagues and people who have permits to use the south entrance of the ball fields and not the entrance that opens onto this path on the east side.
And my other question was, when I'm walking, I'm confused, I'm not sure whether I should walk facing the way the bikes are coming, or the way you would if you were on the street with cars and you're walking in the street.
You mean going to the ball field or?
No, when you're on the bike, when you're on the shared path. If you're on a country lane, you walk facing the cars, you don't walk with the cars behind you.
I don't know what the protocol or convention is for that, but if we make people more aware that it's a shared path, everyone should be alerted.
All right, thank you, John, for answering those initial questions. Now we're going to open it up to the community members that are here. Oh, yeah.
That'd be great. Is this the only one we have? Okay, great, perfect. Yeah, so we are gonna take, let's go, I guess, we
We
can go counterclockwise. Yeah, we are taking about 40 minutes to go in order to answer questions, and we'll go in order. And if you could state your name first and last.
Brian Hoberman, Hoberman,
Thank you.
765 Amsterdam Avenue. I'm not sure if it was brought up in the question, but the lighting is very poor at night along that path, and it makes it treacherous, especially as the days get shorter, which is now occurring. It'll be dark during rush hour by the fall. What is the Parks Department doing about that?
So, excuse me, the placement of the park lighting, which is part of the street lighting grid, is the same there as it is anywhere else in the park. It's basically the spacing of the poles and the illumination, which DOT's engineers calculate. It's the same.
But there's a lot more twists and turns. It's in the woods.
But at night, that doesn't make a difference.
It makes a big difference if you've been on the river at night.
That's what
Yeah.
wants to say.
Wait, Roberta, hi, Roberta, hi, sorry, we're going down the line. Yeah, sorry, we're going down the line, here we go.
My name is Eric Small. I live on the Upper West Side.
Sorry,
And
can you state your name again?
Eric Small.
Thank you, Eric.
Um,
Sorry, chatter, I can't hear to take minutes, so you're gonna get your turn, if we can just please, I'd really appreciate it, thank you. Eric, please.
There doesn't seem to be any delineation between going one way or the other. If you are a commuter going down at 7:30 in the morning, there are bikes flying down one way going south. And people who are going slower, they have to go around them. So the path is not wide enough. The money's been spent. It doesn't seem like you can make the path any wider. So how are you going to deal with that? Also, the delineation around the rotunda is very confusing. You can't figure out which side of the bollard you're supposed to be on. People pass and they go on the other side. So, it sounds like practically none of the board has ever tried to go down and commute.
Lorraine Small, okay, one R in Lorraine.
Perfect, thank you, Lorraine.
Okay, I find the bike path desolate. It's like up there, and, when I ride in the winter, there aren't very many people along the river. I don't know who's gonna be up there, and it's further away from a lot of, whatever. Everything else that was stated is a reality. There needs to be smoothness on that road. There's a lot of bumps, and if it's crowded, you can't, wiggle in and out. And if it was designated to be a bike path to take it out of all of the pedestrians, why are pedestrians up there too? And not only pedestrians, but parked vehicles. And I find the getting on north or south and the getting off north or south, are treacherous. I understand you can't go fast, but some people are exuberant and they want to go down the hills really fast. They don't understand that there are bumps and twists. So it puts everybody else in the position of having to watch out for somebody else aside from themselves. So, it feels like it was established without really taking care of all of these important concerns for the cyclists. Thank you.
Thank you.
Arnold Schickler, I'm a resident on West 86th Street. I ride the bike paths all seasons. I ride them 3 days a week from Washington Bridge down to the Battery and back. And I'm prepared to say to you, sir, that in my opinion, we're waiting for a fatality on that bike path. What I'm going to describe to you now is something that occurred within 5 minutes on July 7th, which was a Sunday. I was coming north right after the barrier, going up the hill. And one of the Parks Department dollies, or whatever you call them, was coming down the hill
totally blocking the path. I'm clipped in. The riders that I'm with are clipped in. There's no ability to stop in the middle of the path, and you have those barriers up. Some of the people cut out, myself included, just to avoid the cart. So the cart had no business being there in the first place. That was the first incident on the way up. The next incident that occurred was on the quick down path after you're coming down from the apex of the circle. When you're going north, you're supposed to be someplace in the path so that you can avoid the cyclists that are coming down the path, and they're flying down. They're not riding down, they're flying down. The incident that I had was the downhill cyclist should have passed me on my left. Instead, he passed me on my right. I've been riding for 70, 80 years, okay? And the only thing that avoided that accident, which would have been a head-on collision, is the fact that I've been doing this for so long. I waited till the last possible second to pull to my left. He should have been on the left. There's no signage there. There's no ability whatsoever to control the downward speed and path of those cyclists. The next thing that occurred, this is all in one 5-minute period. The next thing that occurred, as you ride up to the apex where the circle is, there's a woman on a city bike, clearly a tourist. I'm saying this only because she didn't understand the English language, which I tried to warn her about. As she approached the apex, for some reason, which is inexplicable, and there's no signs there, and any sign would have been worthless, because the person probably wouldn't have read English. Those plastic things that you've got, she went in between just before she reached the apex, and now the cyclists are coming down the other way. Now, this is all within 5 minutes. I can tell you this, when you're going south and you're coming up to the apex, it's almost guaranteed that a cyclist is going to be on the wrong side of those space. It makes no difference whether there's signage or not. There's no signage there, but right now it's waiting for a fatality. The last comment, and this was all within 5 minutes on that path. On the steep path down, in the middle of this mayhem, and this was on a Sunday, and everybody knows that rides regularly. A Sunday is the most treacherous day of the week on that bike path because you've got the tourists and the crazies, and there's no way to avoid them. A car coming down was speeding down. I shouted to the guy to slow down. He gave me a few choice words, which I'm not going to repeat here. Now, what I'm saying to you, sir, is this. In my opinion, having been on this path for as long as I have, it is gross negligence in terms of the way this path has been designed. We are waiting for a fatality, and I'm saying to you, sir, that the answers that you've given so far to the chairperson here are totally inadequate. This was not planned for the safety of either the pedestrians or the cyclists, and it is a grossly dangerous condition. Thank you.
Marge Stuffle. Hi. I'm a walker, and I'm probably one of the few here. So I just want to thank whoever took care of this to make sure that we are not hit by, as someone said, very fast-moving cyclists on that road. I walk there every day. It's been a pleasure. I just am so grateful to have that 10-block radius that I can actually walk on without worrying that I'm going to be hit. And I can tell you that the cyclists come within inches, fast, hordes of people. So the fact that we now have a break from this, I'm grateful, and whoever helped make this happen, I want to thank you.
I'm Danny Pearlstein. I'm a Greenway bike commuter. With our subways and buses so slow and unreliable, the Greenway eases in long and frustrating commutes from across the city. It's also a refuge for cyclists from our dangerous streets, which have seen horrific cyclist and pedestrian casualties this year. Though I am not from CB7, I've passed through the Upper West Side on my bike nearly every day for a decade. For several years, I rode from CB9 to CB1, and I now commute from 12 to 4. The Greenway is public infrastructure of citywide significance. It's a transportation corridor New Yorkers depend on. Important decisions about Greenway management and use should incorporate the views and participation of more than just some of the people who happen to live nearby. As a year-round rush hour bike commuter, I speak from a decade's experience. There is rarely significant pedestrian traffic along the river on weekday mornings or evenings. Bike commuting therefore makes excellent use of our scarce waterfront public space, primarily at times of the day and the year when it's otherwise vacant. In contrast, the half-mile-long bypass around the boat basin is a major obstacle to bike commuting on one of the most important routes in the city. It is hilly, windy, and bumpy, always. It is dark and sometimes slippery. It regularly puts cyclists in the way of moving and idling motor vehicles. The detour makes bike commuting more dangerous and more difficult for many New Yorkers, many of whom cannot afford to live on the Upper West Side. For those like me from Harlem, Washington Heights, Inwood, who work downtown or in Midtown, the detour affords us a sense of exclusion from what has become a private reserve. For those of us who live miles away from the boat basin, biking is the only realistic way for us to enjoy this part of our public park system. This detour inhibits that enjoyment. In order to make equitable use of our core infrastructure, the Greenway detour should operate only on sunny summer weekends and Rosh Hashanah. If there aren't the resources to implement the policy in an appropriately fair and dynamic way, there shouldn't be resources to police the barricades from idling air-conditioned patrol cars either. Ultimately, an inclusive and deliberate Greenway planning process should start from scratch. In a progressive community like ours, all stakeholders, all city agency transportation and bicycle expertise should have a seat at the table. And I want to make one additional observation, which is that the project is totally incomplete. A regular Parks Capital project would never have begun until it was fully funded. This project was barely funded, and yet people went ahead willy-nilly without any of the appropriate expertise obtaining, and that is why the Greenway is waiting for catastrophe. Thank you.
I just want to remind everybody that if you state your statement quickly, then more people will have a chance to speak.
Danny, hi there. Sorry, can I get your statement as part of our record keeping? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Melody Bryant. I also ride the Greenway a lot. I'll try to be very brief. I think it's really great that pedestrians finally have a walkway along the water without bikes to disturb them. It
Sorry,
wasn't
can I
working.
stop you for one moment? I am so sorry. I didn't get your name.
Melody Bryant.
Melody Bryant, thank you.
So I think that was really important. I think it's important for us to be separated. The last statistic that I heard was that something like 26% of all people in Manhattan have cars, but all the rest of us are being pitted against each other for public space. So we shouldn't be. Pedestrians and cyclists really have the same goals, which is to enjoy public space and with not interfere with each other. I'm going to suggest something that's going to be very unpopular. Take a line of parked cars out of Riverside Drive and give it to bikes. You will get the bikes out of the park, and people won't be crossing over that really busy bikeway to get to one.
Hi, I'm Joanne Nagano, 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 and I'm a mother who raised a kid with my husband here on the Upper West Side, cyclist and a runner every day. So I've been using that park for 30 years, and I can tell you as a pedestrian, I really appreciate that it's been cleared off because I've had close mishaps with cyclists who go too fast. And having a child, you can't put them in a harness. They will run away, and that's not an enjoyable way to raise a child with a harness. So not only are we talking about pedestrians, we're talking about children. And I think that's something really important to think about. We do have to share the park, and I'm not advocating one over another. We have to find a way to fix this dangerous situation. But we have a number of constituents to really think about in this whole process.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks. My name is Tom Lansner, Lansar. I've used the park for 40 years, and I mentioned, John, that 40 years ago when I was out biking or running, there was almost nobody there. And if there's an expression mentioned catastrophic success for the park, it's all kudos for the park that they've made it available. But when the bike path was announced, it was announced as a bike path years ago when it was open, and it wasn't announced as a shared space. That was a mistake right away. And people got the idea that it was something for cyclists and not for everybody else. My own opinion now is that the separation has been made. There's no going back to give that area back as a place where bicycles can go. If all of us go down there now, we can see it's a much more calm, peaceful place. The question is now the alternative arrangement for the bicycles on the separate path and making that a viable place where cyclists won't feel endangered and feel that they can make their way. But I don't believe anybody, if you go down to the bike path now, would believe there's any going back. Enforcement, enforcement is another question, and I would suggest much, much clearer signage. Right now, cyclists must dismount. Some people perhaps disingenuously dismount, walk around the barriers and get back on. They think it's a traffic calming effect. Something like pedestrian zone, no cyclists allowed, is much, much plainer and would allow people to understand in the community to also to help enforce it. Mr. Polsey, I'm down there in the morning and there are lots and lots of people walking and unfortunately a lot of oblivious pedestrian dog walkers too, which makes cycling down there at almost any time problematical. So I would not suggest reopening that at any time, any way again to cyclists. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Noam Kogan, do you need me to spell that for you?
Please, the last name.
Kogen. And I was frankly appalled by the change with the bike path in Riverside Park. It's kind of chased me out of there and I feel safer going down Columbus Avenue onto 9th Avenue and onto, on the way back, not using the Riverside path because it's very unclear, it's very dangerous because there's several catastrophes I'm afraid are gonna have to happen before this situation gets changed. Why was this changed? I think it's just ridiculous. If you wanna have, okay, maybe a speed bump at parts of the closed off path now, fine. And I understand that situation, but don't cross off the, don't close that path and make an obstacle to go up and down hills, which can be dangerous and are accordingly not marked. I nearly had a problem with that. So, we gotta get this done either right or don't do it at all and go back to what it was.
Richard Fine, F-I-N-A. I just want to reiterate the need for clarifying the shared path, which I think is a new term to a lot of us, especially on the area where you're going uphill on either side of that rotunda. Bikers are going to want to, especially bikers that need the extra speed to get up that hill, are going to really want to speed up that hill as fast as they can. And if a pedestrian is going to wander in, stopping a biker on the middle of a hill, especially not an experienced biker, is going to be a tragedy. That and using that path 24/7 for 12 months should be addressed because obviously there are times when the part on the river should be utilized by the bikes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. My name is Steve Vaccaro. I live at 29 West 138th Street.
Steve, can you spell your last name for me?
Sure. V as in Victor, A-C-C-A-R-O.
Thank you.
I'm commuting on the bike path daily, 5 or more days a week, and I was involved in some of the earlier meetings that were discussed before, and I have to echo Mr. Pearlstein's comment that it's shocking that the Parks Department put these changes in without getting the necessary expertise and without having sufficient funding. The idea that, oh, we just ran out of funds, so we had enough funds to be able to create the diversion and put up the barricades and maybe put some decals down, but we ran out of paint. So we couldn't put decals showing it was a two-way bike path up on the rotunda for the southbound cyclists. We could only show a single direction of travel, creating a very clear danger of cyclists hitting each other head on and forcing cyclists who are heading northbound to go outside of the flexible plastic delineators in order to continue north, because there's no two-way bicycle signs there, because I guess we ran out of paint. The same thing with the root upheavals that are a serious hazard. The tree roots grow up and they create breaks in the pavement. They've caused very serious injuries up on the Cherry Grove section of Cherry Walk section of the Greenway. I also happen to be an attorney representing people who've been injured in the park, and I can tell you the park has paid out multiples of the $120,000 that it applied to this project for people with traumatic brain injury, with serious fractures, all of these root upheavals that the Parks Department has known about and that Riverside Park has known about for many years and has done nothing about. Absolutely nothing. Those root upheavals will only grow worse. The potholes that haven't filled in will only get larger. And the lack of lighting and the winter conditions that were described before, combined with the terrible grades leading up to and down from the rotunda, to mean cyclists won't even be able to see what portions of the pathway they're climbing at a 8 or 9% grade have had the ice or snow removed from them. In order to be able to climb safely up, they will fall. They will fall on the ascent, they will fall on the descent. It is absolutely not just like any other part of the park. It is just about the busiest bike path in North America. You have detoured hundreds and at times thousands of cyclists up onto a path that simply isn't prepared to handle it. And then you're saying that this is an area that's a shared pathway and will do nothing to limit, guide, channelize, or in any way help manage conflicts between pedestrians and cyclists on this path. Well, I can only say that's how we ended up here. Because in Riverside Park, I've seen such a failure to try to take small steps to intervene to avoid conflicts before the conflicts become so big, before people come to the community board screaming bloody murder, wanting to send people out of the park. Let's take some small, rational, meaningful steps that have worked on other paths, such as the 96th Street shared bike pedestrian path in Central Park, and see if we can make it work without kicking people out of areas of the park. I'd strongly urge you to consider that.
We have less than 20 minutes, so I want to ask people to be as quick as possible.
Hi, I'm Julian Glickman, Glickman. I'm speaking from the perspective of an inexperienced biker, not a horrible biker, but not too experienced. I frequently bike to the RCTA courts. Right from the start, it's very unclear. I live on 66th Street, so I'm going northbound, and it's very unclear right from the start, 77th Street, which way northbound bikers should be biking. And to be straight to the point, the path is very hilly, it's very windy, it's dangerous. Bikers can be going down at 20 miles per hour, hitting people, whatever. And the rotunda as well is very dangerous. Again, the signage is very poor, and the cars are right there.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jesse Berger. That's Jesse without an I and Berger with 2 E's. I actually came here prepared to rant and rave, but I've heard enough other people do that. That's fine. And I am sensitive to pedestrians' fear of being hit by cyclists. I know that when we ride by pedestrians, they think we're much closer than we are and completely out of control. Neither one of those are generally true. There have been no pedestrians killed by cyclists recently. There have been 15 cyclists killed by cars in the first 4 months, so let's put that in perspective. I don't know how this decision was based on, what kind of data went into it, what kind of accidents had actually happened in the stretch along that particular path of the walkway, but I do appreciate that we did need to slow down a cyclist as we went along the water. What I am particularly astonished by is the incredible insensitivity by the Parks Department to what it actually takes to ride a bike on the new section that they've done. The lack of signage, the lack of lighting. You know, you've got an intersection going down that hill where there's a dumpster. My first time up the hill, the dumpster wasn't marked. There was no reflective tape on it. I almost ran into it. The idea that it needn't be as safe for cyclists as we're trying to make it for pedestrians is just amazing. This whole thing was poorly conceived, it was ineptly planned, and it was completely inadequately executed. The lack of signage anywhere, there are half a dozen major intersections between what is now the new bike path and other paths that cross right into it. There's not a single sign at any of those intersections that say, watch out, you're about to walk into what is the busiest north-south bike path in North America. Congratulations, you're about to become part of a traffic path. The same thing at the south end of where the pedestrians come out of what is now a protected pen. They've been ambling along, having a great time enjoying the path along the river. And all of a sudden, they're walking headlong into this bike path. And there's not a single damn sign there. That particular stretch of roadway happens to be the narrowest part of the bike path. It's about as narrow as it is on the top of the rotunda. It is a shared path. They have no idea what they're walking into. And the same thing happens on the north end when gravity pulls us down at a pretty good clip on that hill, even using brakes, and we're walking into what is now a shared path. The lack of intelligent planning and the lack of competent execution is really, really mind-boggling, and I'm really disappointed.
I am Adam Fields. I'm a regular commuter on this path through the bike lane, or shared path, excuse me. I need to say that I need to echo the signage concerns and width concerns, and add a few other things. The objective here was to make things safer for pedestrians, and what we've actually accomplished is making things more dangerous by speeding up the bikes. This is a sheer fact of gravity. When you put a bike up a hill and then down a hill, it goes faster rather than when it's on a straight path. This is physics. Additionally, there are riders of varying skill levels going up and down those hills simultaneously, and I've witnessed several near collisions for bikers who are struggling to get up the hill with people who are racing up the hill. And this is extremely unsafe.
Hi, my name is Robert Jocelyn, Josman. Picture's worth 1,000 words. These are pictures today of numerous, about 10 or 15, most of them going quite fast, actually, still down by the waterfront. You can take a look at them, pass them among yourselves. A couple other quick things. I work with the 2-4, and I can tell you the 24th, I can't speak for the 20th, but the 2-4 is quite aware of the new bike design. It was actually taken apart repeatedly at various build-a-block meetings as late as this Friday. They are not happy at all with what was done. Just also really quickly, in reference to your signage, throughout the park, or throughout the bikeway, there were these signs that were put up, okay? Bike people, according to the dockmaster there, have done this to them. They've almost all been removed. More importantly is all this stuff about signage and all, and as Ken's article talks about the grade, there is a clearly marked on the pavement saying that it's two-way all throughout the bikeway. You can get that's about
Not upon the rotunda.
That's the sir, that's the rotunda right
Go
there.
10 feet north onto the
Yeah.
Ballard. It's not there.
The other also, in reference to the shared bike lane piece of it, it is also clearly marked. It's in the green sign on the right.
Now we're on Riverwalk?
The other thing I just wanted to say really quickly is in reference to vehicles accessing the 79th Street boat basin. The sign actually coming in from the part of 79th Street doesn't say no vehicles. It actually has an arrow directing people for taxi cabs and for pickups to that location for the boat basin. I just walked through it actually. If you walk from Riverside Drive, the north side of the entrance there, it's been on the wall for 20 or 30 years.
It's right there, it's the drop off. That's the drop off.
No, it has an arrow pointing that way and it directs people to go down that little ramp and around to where the dumpster is.
Where is that from?
It's on the 79th Street when you're driving into, I guess, the rotunda. It's on the 79th Street
Before
side.
before you go under the overpass,
Yes,
that's the drop off point.
But it
that
doesn't
people
say-
are supposed to walk
But
on the
there's a-
sidewalk, If you
That
stay
may
on the
be the-
sidewalk, you can't go in the traffic circle if you're on the sidewalk.
that may
Guides
be
you
the
down
intention,
stairs.
but the arrow says straight go that way. That the drop-off point, there's an arrow below it that's pointing this way for traffic. The other thing real quick, there's another picture of this little packet that I put together. You want to save some money, turn the lights up. The lights are on all day long on the promenade. Okay, all the street lights, they've been on for 6 months. And the other thing, really quickly, like people keep saying, they use bike, shared path, bike lane, whatever you want to name it. At night, park signs up where I am in the 90s say park closes at dusk. There should be nobody actually out there after dusk. Thank you.
1 a.m. It's 1 o'clock.
All right, we need to be really.
Excuse me, 99th Street on the waterfront, or where is that sign?
It's whenever you went to the park in the upper 90s.
Sorry.
Okay.
Are we on a separate, I apologize, Robert, I got the last of your comments. Who are we on now?
Christina Craver.
Christina Craver, Kreb, and then Bob ER.
Thank you.
I'm both a cyclist and I walk my dog in that area on the new bike shared path every day. I would really love to know the research that went into this because it seems to me that all they did was move the problem up to that path and amplify it because it's less safe for cyclists. And now any pedestrian that walks that way, like I do every day with my dog, because I like the shade, and it's much more pleasant to walk there because of the shade, and I don't have to worry about roots and hills on my bike. I feel like I'm taking my life in my hands. I agree with everyone who said it's like fatality waiting to happen. I saw a cyclist almost hit a toddler on my first day walking there. It's awful, it's frightening, the signage is horrible, it's not safe for cyclists, it will be even worse when it gets dark earlier, and when the weather conditions are bad. Brakes aren't great when the pavement's wet, but I also would like to enjoy it as a pedestrian and not be terrified of picking my dog up and yanking him away all the time because it's not clear that it's shared, and I think it is not going to work to ask cyclists to slow down when they're charging a hill to get up it, and they're trying to get to work, or when they're coming down a hill. It's just not gonna happen. It needs to be moved back, and the issue is being respectful of each other and not speeding in certain areas, and this did not address that at all.
Hi, Justin Peck,
Sorry,
P like
Justin, can
Peter,
you give
ECK.
me like 30
Okay,
seconds?
I'll just talk because we're short on time, and when you're ready for my name, I'll let
No,
you
no,
know.
no, I just need a couple more seconds to finish my sentence.
Our main priority
Oh, she
is
said
that,
to hurry up.
our
right?
main priority is that everyone is heard.
Oh,
We have no
okay, so are
arbitrary
we extending
cutoff.
the question period?
We are adjourning this meeting. We have no arbitrary cutoff.
Oh, good.
There is no
Great.
arbitrary cutoff, but we certainly have many more people to get through, so we
Okay,
want
great.
to be
That's
mindful.
great.
Like everyone just.
Yeah, I'll be concise, but it's great to know that we're not gonna cut these people off.
Wait, what is your name again?
She wants my name.
Yes, I want your name.
Peck, Justin.
Thanks.
Choreographer?
Got it.
I think this is a poor solution. I ride my bike, I walk my dog with my wife here. We've taken the volume of what is a shared path in 2 places and jammed it into 1. It's narrower than the path that the bikes were on before, and it's still shared. It's a bizarre solution. I don't really understand. I'm actually really curious what research, that went into this, what was considered and what was done before this change was made.
Thank you.
No, I'm asking a question.
I mean, I'll just
Yeah.
speak to that. I'm from Councilmember Helen Rosenthal's office. As Ken mentioned, this was one of the top vote getters of participatory
I don't know
budgeting.
the research.
This was a funding project that came from the
Okay.
community.
No,
So
no,
this is
I just want,
something
that's
that
not
the
the question.
community has been
I think your
hearing
question
about.
is answered.
That's the answer. Okay. Anyway, the entrance, there are children, there are children who enter the ball field to the north also. Yes, I understand. There's two entrances. The bike path narrows below, the narrowest part of the shared path is below where we've made this solution. So what's happening is you're making sure people can walk along the river and have a nice day free from bicycles, which is nice. I love the idea of that. And then at the end, on the south end where it's tightest, there's no solution and we're jamming them all together.
Just on that point, there is a capital project about to begin that is going to address that whole nexus right there at 72nd Street. It's going to be widened. There are going to be 2 pedestrian paths added to pull pedestrians off of that route. The bikes and pedestrians will be separated south of there as it is south of 69th Street.
I've seen those plans, yeah.
Yeah, so that's coming.
Okay, and finally, I think it's a cultural problem. I think what's happening is there's the people who do not like bikes, full stop, and there's the people who are disrespectful to pedestrians, and then there's a lot of people in between. And I think if we are really going to be encouraging, like our next mayor maybe has a big plan about making the city not car-like and increasing bike paths and whatever, we're going to have to put up with shared use and being accustomed to having bicycles around us. The answer is not to have them separated completely. It's to welcome that aspect of transportation into our culture here that wasn't here. And there's plenty of infrastructure that takes care of cars.
Thank you.
Ready? Hi, my name is Jay Thomas, D-A-M-A-S-K. I'm a bike commuter. I've been commuting for about 10 years along the Greenway. It's great. I am all for the pedestrian safety. I've certainly ridden along that narrow part as a cyclist, always looking out for pedestrians. So I'm pleased in the summer to see this, but I would like to speak to the board. I cannot envision this being a permanent, that is to say, year-round solution. As a commuter, pick a number, but by early October, there's no one on the weekdays, which is when I'm out. There's no one on that shared path in the morning and very few in the evening. The whole, by the river, correct, thank you, by the river. In the summer, in the evening coming home, for sure, there's tons of people, but it's just not true that that it's crowded from just picking a number like October 1 to May 1. It's just not crowded. In addition, I live on 89th, and when you come down to the water from 89th, there's that ramp, and that ramp kind of switchbacks around, snows up and ice is up, and I have to get off and walk that bike, and it can be completely clear on the greenway, and yet it ices up and snows up first, and then, so I just got off. To not have good lighting and to have a possibly or likely snowy situation in the winter months when we could just go straight is a hazard, and you really need to think about that before you make this permanent. I would really ask you not to make it.
Can I just ask you to clarify at 89th Street, are you talking about around Soldiers and Sailors?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I know. Well, then it needs to be reconsidered. It's a hazard.
Hi, Erica Helgen, Helgen. I know I'm in the minority here, but I am a pedestrian, and I do just want to say I am a pedestrian who completely stopped going down to the river and using that area because it just got to be too dangerous. I take walks with my mom who has mobility issues. My nieces and nephews, we just stopped going there full stop because we were tired of being screamed at. We were tired of the close calls. We didn't want to, like some persons said, we did not want to have, leashes and whatnot. And that's, that's the most beautiful part of that park. It's right down by the water. There are beautiful benches there. If you completely close that off to pedestrians, I think that the solution is a lot better. And I actually am someone who also uses those upper areas, which are now shared use. I mean, they've always been shared use, but, and I actually, have felt that it is still safer than the river because you have the areas of grass. I have a dog, I walk my dog there. My dog can go on the grass, I can step on the grass. There's a, path to the side. I feel much safer. I would never take my dog down to the river, excuse me, during, when bikes were down by the river. So I just wanted to say that I appreciate CB7 and the Parks Department doing that.
Hi, my name is Peter Eatroff, Eatroff. I have been using the bikeway for probably about almost 10 years, about 3 times a week maybe, to go all the way from the Lower East Side where I live up to Inwood and back. So I've done it a lot. And I will say it does feel like the problem down by the river has just been moved up to that upper section. I know a lot of people have said that already. I'm not going to reiterate all the problems for cyclists on that path and make it much more dangerous. But what I will add to that is that when it's dangerous for me as a cyclist, to concentrate on the potholes and the turns and the bad lighting and all that, I can concentrate less on the people. The other day, there was a family of 4 plus 2 strollers walking stretched out across that at the bottom of the rotunda, which comes down around a blind turn. So I'm coming down on my brakes because I know that it's a little bit dangerous, but they're right there. And somebody who might be less skilled could have a collision. I'm waiting for some bad collision to happen there because there may be less interactions between cyclists and pedestrians up there, but each one seems a lot more dangerous. I've had a lot more close calls up on that path in these last couple of weeks than I did in the years riding in the other part. So I just feel like you simply moved the problem.
Hello, my name is Brad Taylor. That's BradTaylor. I just wanted to say, I've worked with the Parks Department for 19 years now. I've been a park advocate in the neighborhood and further north for all that time. I just wanted to say I love my friends in parks, but this is beyond your capacity, guys. This is a transportation issue, as brought up before. The 120,000 or whatever it was would have been better spent planning and getting some transportation designers to do this thing right. So I love you guys, but you're coming in here and saying that you're going to have those steep slopes with no ice, just the way you have it down on the promenade. No way, Jose. I have worked in steeply sloped parks for 19 years now as a volunteer. It doesn't happen. So I'm glad this is all being recorded, because when the lawsuits start coming, that's going to be on the record that we're going to keep that just as free of ice as the other area. It's not happening. This is a transportation corridor. You got to recognize that. Yes, it's a beautiful park, and I love parks more than anyone. Well, it's hard to say. I'm sure you all love it as much as I do, but this has always been a transportation corridor, and you got to separate the transportation that's flying through in different aspects of it. I mean, if you were here when this thing, before the park had the covered area where the trains go, would you have a shared path? Let's see, pedestrians, can you just walk along the tracks for a bit and we'll see how you do? I mean, come on. You need an overall solution that takes into account that this is a major transportation corridor as well as a park thing.
Hi, my name is Avram Tillman. I am a bike commuter.
I'm so sorry, can you spell your whole name for me?
AVRUMTILMAN.
Thank you.
I'm a bike commuter from the Upper West Side down to Midtown East. Echo what everyone else has said, that what this has done is created a worse condition, faster cyclists going down those hills, and by increasing that peak speed, I've definitely found the pedestrians that are left there are less aware and more at risk of being hit by a major collision than when it was on the shared path by the river. As this was proposed as a safety proposal to separate people, I don't know why it's not make that strictly a bike path, keep pedestrians down by the river. If there's issues that need to be addressed in terms of new access points for the track, for the ball fields, create those points and make it strictly a bike path, then you've eliminated any points of conflict. It's strictly there for cyclists. By the rotunda also, no matter what's gonna happen with signage, the bollards are too narrow and you're not going to get all cyclists going to the riverside of the bollard. It's not a wide enough path. If you ask DOT, they would never have created a two-way bike path that narrow, and kind of shocking to see, hey, we want to do two-way, so we're going to squeeze it in however narrow it is, regardless of if it's a feasible solution. Thank you.
One more.
Hi, my name is Angel Tripp. Can you read spell that?
Just your last name, Angel.
Tripp, T-R-I-P-P.
Great.
So, I think only in politics can you get a solution to a problem that is this short-sighted, irrational, and counterproductive. I would itemize all the problems with this new detour, but I think it's done so well, I won't go into detail on that matter. I would like to add, first of all, I take umbrage with the fact that everyone is referring to cyclists as though we're all speed demons. We are not. I know there's a portion of cyclists that go extremely fast, but I've ridden on that path many, many times. I would say most of us are not the speed demons. Most of us are riding more leisurely, and you can't penalize all of us for the actions of a few bad apples. Many people have commented on the fact that this is a year-round solution, and I agree with that, I agree that it should not be a year-round solution, but I also want to add that even in the summertime, I like to take the path at night because obviously it's darker, it's harder for cars to see me, there's a lot more risk when I'm sharing the road with cars, so I like to take the path at night to have a safer commute back, and that this is going to make it more difficult. It's giving me what used to be a safe alternative is now just as risky as riding in the road. And then I just also want to just remind you all that this is not just about the Upper West Side. There are people from all over the city who use this path. This is the path that connects the Bronx and Upper Manhattan to downtown Manhattan and Brooklyn and vice versa. This is not just about you all. This is about all of us in the city. This is a main artery. It is the only uninterrupted stretch of north-south path that we have to use as cyclists where we can feel safe and not have to worry about being killed like the 14 or 15 people that have been killed in the past few weeks. I think this is completely short-sighted and we really need to rethink it.
Hi, my name is Daniel Atha, A-T-H-A, and this comment is directed as much to the board as it is to the Parks Department, and if there's any Department of Transportation here. I think there's too much proliferation of plastic in our infrastructure in the city, and I'm really disappointed to see the proliferation of the plastic bollards. I know that they're proposed for Central Park West, and that's my comment to the board, is that we have a solid line of plastic bollards going from 59th Street to 110th Street. It's going to be very unattractive. And Riverside Park is a landmark park, and I think if it's jumped up with a lot more plastic that are glued down to the asphalt, it's also going to be very unattractive. That's my comment. Thank you.
Okay, back to the chairs.
All right, now we are going to go into statements that have been submitted to our committee to Ken. Ken is going to read statements from the public that have been submitted to him. Afterward, we are going to have committee questions and comments so that John can answer. John, if you are still available to stay.
Can Ken summarize the comments?
Ken, how many comments? I think there's only a few.
There are 8 comments.
No, but it's there.
We've already discussed.
I'm willing to stay and listen to them. Okay. The
I am
first
too.
one is from Matthias Hess. The sudden detour took me by surprise, and I had several close calls because of it. It's clearly been implemented with very little thought for its users, and I haven't ridden since because of the poor, dangerous design. The next one is from Randy Cohen. who, if anybody knows, was the first ethicist of the New York Times. I've ridden that detour in both directions now, and it's quite a climb even for me. I'm certain that it will discourage many older and younger people from riding at all, and even more certain that it will make their commutes so much worse for so many people. I like the solution of limiting this dreadful route to the busiest days of the year, maybe summer weekends. This is from Kim Schneiderman. There is a stretch heading up and down from the street around 79th Street that is absolutely no lighting. I had to get off my bike because I couldn't see where I was going, just as 4 bikers raced past me shouting, "I can't see blank." I'm not gonna say the word. Is anyone policing this greenway? Does the Parks Department realize how negligent they've been not lighting the stretches of the path leading up and down from the street? This is from Willard Stelter. In addition to the concerns I'm sure others will raise, there are serious safety implications of requiring this bypass at all times of the day and night year-round. When I bike up Riverside to get home, it's normally late at night and I bike year-round. And I'm a petite woman alone who doesn't bike fast. It is scary being away from the few people who are out at these hours and tucked away behind the trees, especially considering the rates in Riverside Park in recent years. I'm dismayed that the community board would allow this restrictive rule. There are so few pedestrians off hours and in colder seasons. I really hope the committee will reconsider the all day, all season requirement. This is from Rhonda Schaffner. I can no longer commute on the bike path from 92nd Street to 72nd Street in the early morning because as a woman, I don't feel safe taking the new bike route. It is surrounded by trees. It is just too isolated at 8:15 a.m. I wonder if the rule can be adjusted so that Hudson River Greenway can be open to bicyclists before 9 a.m. I am now biking to work on Riverside Drive, where there is no bike path, and with all the traffic, it is not as safe as a bike path. This is from Gianni Sellers. As a resident, cyclist, and pedestrian of the Upper West Side, I would like to express my complete support for the detour that was put in place. While not a perfect solution, it has allowed for pedestrians to stroll peacefully between the two street axes. To finally reclaim a small portion of the waterside for pedestrians only has changed the experience of strolling along the waterfront without constantly looking backward to avoid a collision with a cyclist. While most cyclists are indeed responsible and considerate riders, that small minority that is not can make life dangerous for the majority of us. In addition, I would also like to make the point that enforcement of the detour still remains lax. Just this past weekend, I saw a number of cyclists flouting the signs to dismount at both ends of the entrances. I urge the Community Board 7 to support the continuance of the separation of the pedestrians and cyclists on the waterfront, to do what is necessary to even improve on the existing arrangement to satisfy the needs of both pedestrians and cyclists. And finally, JP Portland. It is the official bike route. If it is the official bike route, then there does need to be markings for both cyclists and pedestrians suggesting the path is now a bike path so that people walk knowing they're interacting with cyclists. I had to deal with people who were walking dogs on long leashes who seemed nonplussed to have cyclists riding on their walk.
Okay, thank you, Ken. So now I'd like to open it up to the joint committee members and then any non-committee members who are here tonight. Cindy, do you have any questions or any follow-up?
No, just one thing I wanted to say. Some of the comments imply that the community board has the power to, make a change on this issue, or that it's all generated from this body. And I just think it's important for people to understand and for the pressed to report that that's not how it is. And I understand there was a transportation meeting where the same thing was assumed, that, you know, people think that we make the laws and tell the Parks Department what to do. And I think, you know, as an advisory board, we do our best to bring our opinions forward and to represent the community. But at the end of the day, I just think sometimes the language in the comments isn't accurate. And I think we should do what we can as a board to clarify that whenever we can, because it seems to be a broad misconception.
Safety's first for everybody, everyone. So just hearing a lot of the themes about lighting, whatever we decide to do, it seems to me that additional lighting, perhaps solar lights along the pathway, that would maybe be a solution to illuminate the pathway. The concept of seasonality is an interesting one to me. I don't know if that's even a possibility, but you know, for example, the cafe is open during a certain season. There is definitely a change with weather and the use of the path for both cyclists and pedestrians and other wheeled vehicles. As far as not knowing where you are in the park, there's a simple way to have mile markers on the bollards. That's done in Central Park. That's very easy. And you know, the signs, you know, the clarity is the most important thing, I think, anywhere in anything. So there's obviously universal signs that are non-verbal or not written in any particular language. So just the person's comment that someone doesn't speak English, it shouldn't be language sensitive. There are universal signs that are very clear what a cyclist is, what a pedestrian is. And yeah, if you are going to have a sign that is in English, if it says pedestrians only, it should be not just no bicycles, there should be no wheeled vehicles, because there's so many other classifications of vehicles that are present and coming. So that's all I have to say for now.
Susan?
Cindy, I think what you said was brilliant. And really nicely said. I had the displeasure of taking the meeting minutes at the Parks Committee meeting in 2016, 15 or 16, when this project first was discussed. And it went on for hours. There were about 40 or 50 people here, most of them people who walked in the park. And it was heart-wrenching to hear them talk about how terrifying they found it to walk in the park. There were very few cyclists that night. It was pretty much the polar opposite of what we've had tonight. And it was really quite telling in terms of the need. And I think the fact that it came in number 2 in a participatory budgeting vote was also pretty telling. So the committee back then discussed it and voted on it. The vote was 4-1 in favor of doing something to separate the pedestrians and the cyclists. And then at the full board, it was a thorough discussion. And it was voted, whether or not it lost by 1 vote or 20 votes, it was voted on. And at the time, it was discussed, as Clary said quite accurately, that we would look back at it in 2 years. We wouldn't look back at it a month or 2 after the implementation and try to rewrite it or try to undo it. So I think the seasonality issue was also discussed at that time. And it was discussed that it would need to be done year-round because it would be difficult to do it otherwise. As far as the compliance and what's going on, I went down there this afternoon and I walked the route all the way up the Greenway and then back down along the bike path. And I saw no bulging routes, so I think that situation seems good for right now for one person's view from today at 4:30. I did see 10 bicycles along the waterway. It seems like it's improved quite a bit, but there's certainly more to be done. I agree about the signage. I'm delighted that you're doing something about that. I agree with the lighting. Adding some lights would probably be useful. As far as not having a safe place to ride, we have so many bike lanes going north and south. It would seem to me like there'd be plenty of places where people could go north and south. And I know this is part of an extended pathway. It just seems like, give it a chance to work, folks. And I think the Parks Department deserves more respect than they got tonight. I think you've done a great job on trying to address this. Just give it a chance to work. And I think a little bit of everybody working together would go a long way. Sir, you can shake your head no all you want. Nobody has discussed the 4-year-old girl who was hit. Nobody has discussed a lot of the other pedestrians that have been hurt. We hear a lot about all sorts of other stuff. Excuse me.
Please,
Excuse me.
let's not have an interaction between Let's just let the board members speak.
Sorry, this is a time, you all had your time. We were trying to be very civil here. You all had your time. Now it's our time. Please let Susan finish. Please, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. So at any rate, I think what Cindy said was really accurate. We are just trying to do our best to represent everybody in the community. And I think it's important to let that process work its way out.
Okay, so I was the chair of this committee at the time when the Parks Department presented the plan for this, how to spend the $200,000, and also when that came before the full board. Cindy is absolutely right, and but to be a little more specific about that, I think we should not forget that this project was neither a Community Board 7 budget priority, nor did it originate with the Parks Department. Everybody, of course, is in favor of safety. Everybody in a perfect world wants cyclists and pedestrians to be and cars and other forms of transportation to be safely separated from each other. But the reality is that we are dealing with the existing real estate and topography in Riverside Park. And you can only do the best you can with what you've got. Whether this will turn out to have been the best we can do or not, I think it's very important to know that we will have a look back after 2 years, however that turns out to be measured in light of the Rotunda project. But the fact that it didn't originate with either Community Board 7 or the Parks Department, both of whom give a great deal of thought and a sort of at least generalized notion of pre-planning before we and feasibility before we propose a project. Because this one came about in a sort of apple pie way with participatory budgeting, well, sure, lots and lots of people are going to say, sure, I place a great deal of priority, and of course I'm going to vote for something that will separate pedestrians and cyclists without having a great deal of knowledge or thought about the reality of how that's going to work. So I think the Parks Department, subject to a lot of very, very cogent comments tonight, and last month and all the time, has taken the limited money they have and done what they were essentially directed to do. There's a long way to go, and we need to keep having these very constructive conversations about how to make it better as we get towards that 2-year look back. I want to say a couple specific things, and maybe one of these will even turn into a question for John. Number one, we personally observed among us not one but 2 incidents at the base of the southbound base of the rotunda within the first few days of this mandatory. John, you and Ken were on the same wavelength about one of them. My husband saw the ambulance there for what was one or the other of them, and I know some of my colleagues had seen one on a prior day. So there were at least 2, maybe at least 2 ambulance incidents involving cyclists, although I don't know anything about the details of what happened, going southbound at the base of the rotunda within the first few days. There may have been others, but those are the ones we know about. Second, my husband, who is more than I am in the summer because it's just too hot for me, but the last few days has said to me as he's taken an exercise, he's a big cyclist, but in Riverside Park, he tends to be an exercise walker. So walking north from Riverside Park south, crossing 72nd Street twice in the last week, he has said as a pedestrian that it is a far, far, far more dangerous experience to be a pedestrian there than it ever was. And the reason is, and this is partly the topography, it's partly because there can be really no enforcement, is bikers are speeding down or are careening down off the rotunda, down further slopes downward. Then as they turn west at the bottom of the grand staircase, they have a sharp right turn down a further slope. And even if they may be braking because they're about to make a left turn, he said as the pedestrian, he was nearly run down by 3 cyclists twice. One was this morning and one was the other day. This morning was worse because he was down at about 8:30 and the sun was in his eyes, and so the glare made it even worse. But this was essentially the same experience he had. So the inherent slopes of the topography are, I think, one of the most difficult issues to address. whether in the long term this remains a mandatory detour or bypass or not, whether in the long run, and I think this is a bad idea to make it cyclists only, that would raise a whole nother set of problems. The most difficult thing to deal with is the topography of the steep slope up and over the rotunda that sends people going southbound at least at a very high speed, and then further slopes coming down towards 72nd Street and then westward from the staircase to 72nd Street. I don't have solutions to those challenges, but they are central to the safety issues. Other things that have been talked about tonight, I would hope John can deal with in the very short run. Signage all over the place that differs and adds on to what is there now. I mean, I'm a big fan of John, big fan of Riverside Park. We've worked together for years, but John, I just don't buy the answer that the lighting is no different in this section of the park from any other section in the park. Now that you have a very special heavy duty day and night, winter and summer use for cyclists, and it's a mandatory part of the Greenway, I think there has to be a way, and whether it's Doug's suggestion of solar lights or something else, a better way to illuminate the path. And so there are a lot of things that were talked about tonight that can be done quickly and should be done quickly, and thanks to Helen's office, we hope there'll be some money to do those things. But I think that the major takeaway for me is maybe it will turn out that this was a bad idea, and that because we don't have the real estate to do it ideally, it may be that it wasn't the greatest idea, but we don't know that yet. We've got 2 years to look at it, and there was the vote to make it year-round, and we can't at this point reverse that. I suppose we could, but we can't do that tonight, and it's not up to CB7, certainly not tonight, to do that. And the topography. So we need to keep trying incrementally, but as fast as we can, to make it work, and then take a look and see where we are in 2 years.
I never turn the camera to myself, but I'm going to. It feels wrong to do it, but clearly this was a horrible situation. I have 2 young daughters, and especially when they're on the waterfront, I'm terrified of the reckless cyclists. I think number one, we all agree, safety has to be the number one concern. And I would add that we need to ensure that elderly and young pedestrians should be our top priority. Number two, I think we can all agree that this was well-intentioned and we know a large amount of money has been spent. Having said that, I'm convinced that we're more likely to see serious injuries or even fatalities with this new configuration. In my simple mind, I see 3 types of park users. This is echoing what I believe Angela said. Number 1 is pedestrians, number 2 is responsible cyclists, and number 3 is reckless cyclists. Ultimately, the problem has always been excessive speed. Because of reckless cyclists, we had a really bad situation and something clearly needed to be done. Unfortunately though, this will make it worse, as what we're doing is we're giving these reckless cyclists, who are the ones who caused the problem in the first place, the ability to go much faster and putting pedestrians at far greater risk. Even though pedestrians are safe from reckless cyclists along the water, they're in far greater danger on the path to and from the water. And hearing that this path is considered a shared path is astonishing. I've cycled this new path a number of times in the past few weeks, and I had no idea it was a shared path. And allowing pedestrians to go on this path is incredibly irresponsible. The entire point of this was to prevent conflict by not having a shared path. Here, Parks has created a shared path that hasn't even achieved the primary goal that we had set of separating, or that the participatory budgeting had set of separating pedestrians from cyclists. But instead, it has given cyclists the ability to go 20 or even 30 miles per hour down the steep hills on the shared path. Further, we're forcing the responsible cyclists, who are on a critical part of our transportation infrastructure, onto a path that too many of them, and especially young and elderly cyclists, aren't able to use because it's too steep. These are the cyclists who, like Julian, are only willing to commute or allowed to commute or otherwise cycle if they can do so without cars. What does need to happen is the opposite of this. We need to make sure that reckless cyclists, like the one who injured a 4-year-old toddler a few weeks ago, don't speed in crowded areas. The board unanimously passed my resolution, I believe last month, calling for a 10-mile-per-hour speed limit on shared paths. That's what we need, not a bike path that enables reckless cyclists to go even faster. And by the way, I've been riding this path for over a decade and have been on the board for years. And I didn't know that until last year that the cobblestones on the greenway are intended to slow bikes down. And I've actually heard that the way for them to not be so annoying is to speed up, which I understand is what a lot of cyclists do.
They were a complete failure. They were an idea, but they don't.
Yeah, and the fact that people didn't
Quite a
even.
few years ago, it's probably 20 years old, those.
Yeah. And I've probably been riding it 20 years and had no idea that's what they were there for. And I've always wondered, why are there cobblestones here? But never dreamed that they were to slow cyclists down. I do want to reiterate a point that a number of people made, which is that this needs to be planned by transportation experts and conform with standard transportation planning. I'm definitely not an expert. I did a little bit of searching and I found an AASHTO guide, which I don't know if that's a standard, the ASHTO guide, but the quote, grades steeper than 5% are undesirable because the ascents are difficult for many path users and the descents can cause some users to exceed the speeds at which they are competent or comfortable. So I don't want us to, as Clary said, we might at some point decide this is a bad idea. Too often we decide on bad ideas only after a fatality. And I want to make sure that doesn't happen here. And I agree with Steve and others. I really worry that it's just a matter of time until someone is killed on this new path. And I'd like to tonight, and we can have board discussion, but call a resolution calling for the reversal before this fatality happens. Again, something needs to be done to protect pedestrians, but I'm really concerned that this is creating even more of a public safety hazard.
You want to pass it?
Okay.
John, I want to say thank you so much for coming and answering all of our questions, listening to all the comments. I want to say thank you so much for the community who has come on both sides of the aisle. It's really important for us to hear everyone's concerns, experiences, etc., ideas. What I would like to convey, John, to you, and again, as a new co-chair of this committee in the first year of my chairship with Ken, I'm still learning about the process of how this came to be. I am a regular user of Riverside Park. I'm a runner. I do not cycle. That does not mean to say that I'm not understanding or hearing all of your concerns. What I would say though, echoing Cindy, Clary, Susan, Rich, Doug, all of my fellow committee members, is that safety is a #1 concern. And what I would say is fair and reasonable is to address the questions that we've had tonight, go back to the drawing board on some of the issues regarding signage, possibilities of detours using stanchions, etc., and seeing what a fix could be. Because I know that a lot of work went into this project, a lot of back and forth went into this project. Rich, I disagree. I don't think we should pass a resolution. I don't think that that is a smart way to create precedent here. I think that we need to give John and Parks a fair try at fixing what is clearly broken at this point. Completely agree that there are things that are completely off. I mean, cars should not be going down at any point in time. Ken shouldn't have to run down a hill to warn other cyclists. Shouldn't be happening. I would say, Marissa, thank you so much for adding the clarity around the funds and budget that might be available as an expense item. I think that that is something that we should definitely hear more about and discuss what could be used to fix some of these problems. Again, Rich, I don't agree with the resolution. I don't think that our board, or rather the committee right now, has enough information. Someone mentioned, I think it was, is it Peck? Yeah. Someone mentioned research, right? I am a researcher by trade, so I think we should do a little bit more research and we should give Parks the benefit of the doubt to address what problems are withstanding right now before we go and pass any sort of resolution and we don't know what the fixes should be. Again, if the topography of this park were different, if it was a straight path, would make complete sense to me, right? That would make sense. I've heard it from the community tonight. But right now, John has a full plate of ideas, of concerns, of potential fixes that can help solve some of these problems. I'm still not convinced about the seasonality of this. I
John, I didn't care for your answer that you had tonight, but that's not to say that you can't come back to us before end of October happens and we can't discuss further details. So that is my sentiment. Ken, I'd like to pass it over to you.
First of all, I just want to, well, I understand that this has pleased a lot of people who walk on the waterfront path. I personally saw a couple of pedestrians rush up to a PEP officer and thank him profusely for doing this as if they were the ones who did it. So I get that. But I think what's happened from what we've been hearing and what I've experienced is that we've traded an occasionally unsafe condition for, and we've created a safe condition along the water, but we've traded it for a much more unsafe condition for both cyclists and pedestrians on the new path. And I would not want to see us wait for a really bad injury or a fatality to remedy that situation. I think there's some things that the Parks Department can do quickly, but there are other things that are going to take a lot of time, and such as lighting. I've ridden on it at night, and going down from 79th Street is really, really scary. There just is not adequate lighting there. And it is, let me tell you, even getting solar lights in there, it's going to take a long time for that to happen. The days are getting shorter already, and this is going to become a very dangerous situation for commuters. And a lot of people are just going to choose not to use it. And then there's the question of ice and snow. There is no way that can be remedied. I don't care how much salt you have. We cannot wait for a tragedy of somebody going down that steep 8% grade. Forget what AASHTO says about 5%, 8% grade, and wipe out there. And you know, you talk about research. There was research done a couple of years ago about the usage of the path during the seasonal time that we were talking about, from November to April. And the research showed unequivocally that there is very, very little usage by pedestrians during that time. And I can show you the data. And this was collected over a period of about 5 months. And it showed that when it's below 60 degrees and when it's dark, hardly any pedestrians are out, and it can be safely used by both types of users. So I don't want to wait until there's a tragedy. I want to second Rich's resolution. I think at the very least, we should be calling we are advisory. We can't tell people what to do. We should be advising the powers that be here that we cannot have this in effect during the winter. That is creating a dangerous situation, and that I don't know whether your resolution would go to that in terms of reversing it, but is your resolution to reverse it?
Yes.
Totally?
Yes, my resolution is to reverse it. Ultimately, and we could go down 6-2, and I'm still happy to have brought it up. We had a fatality recently in Central Park West, and going into that, I knew that Central Park West was the most dangerous north-south corridor for cyclists. And after that fatality, my thought was, I didn't do enough. I should have spoken up louder. I should have done more. Here, I really feel this is a fatality waiting to happen. And even if we go down, at least I'm feeling like I'm doing whatever I can do. And I really am worried that we're giving cyclists the ability to go way too fast and it's not something that can be easily reversed. It's topography. It's a very hilly road. And by putting cyclists on this very steep path instead of on level ground, we're causing a very bad situation to get even worse. And you can all vote against it.
I also just want to mention that for the last 15 or 20 years, there really has been no attempt to do anything on the waterfront path to make it safer and calm cyclists. The only thing that's happened is that the pavement markings have just been getting more faint and more faint.
Well, and my understanding is there's no speed limit,
And,
which is why we passed the resolution calling for a speed limit.
okay. So I'm seconding Rich's resolution. If it fails, I'm going to propose a seasonal resolution.
I'd like to speak to the resolution. However, you haven't called on Mark, who may have something to say.
Or me.
Yeah.
Do you want to go last?
Yeah, I'll go last.
Okay.
And then I do want to take his book. Sure.
Thanks. I'm not actually prepared to talk about the resolution. So, and there are a couple of granular things that I think are worth talking about. One has to do with on the southern end of where you enter the bypass. There's a series of bollards, and there is a logo for bikes, and I think it has arrows in both directions. But it doesn't appear to me to be clear, well, from my experiences there, who is supposed to be in the narrower portion of that detour. I think it's supposed to be for pedestrians who are coming to and from the staircase, but my observation is that cyclists think that the northbound folks are supposed to be in that part of the path, and then the southbound cyclists are in the wider part, which might make some rational sense because the wider part is going to be the more tricky turn. By the way, thank you. The entry and exit points from the bypass when it was first implemented were kind of sandy and silty, and making that turn, and I managed to break my hip on that turn, having nothing to do with the bypass. So, and I didn't sue anyone. But the sand removal has been a welcome thing, and I hope it'll continue. But I appreciate very much that has been paid attention to. And then on the rotunda itself, there's another narrow area where I think it's supposed to be two-way cycling, but I'm not entirely convinced that two cyclists can pass each other safely up there. I don't know if it's possible to widen that part without blocking the truck traffic that has to go
on the very top.
On the traffic circle itself, but sort of that western porch, if you will, that, yeah. With respect to the tree roots, I actually observed a nice young woman from Columbia who went over one of the tree roots on the southbound part of going from the traffic circle down heading south. There are a series of tree roots that unfortunately are a dangerous bump there, and they're in shade. So they're a little hard to see. And a young woman who was on a city bike without a helmet went over the handlebars and had to be removed by ambulance. Kudos, by the way, to the PEP officers who did an excellent job of one of them attending to her while the other one went and got the ambulance, and they did exactly what they're supposed to do. It was before the Pride March, so so maybe 3 weeks ago. There's a logo for the Greenway, and the signage on this part doesn't have it. I don't know if that's intentional, but to the extent that you're asking folks to follow signage, it would make sense that the logos that they're following south and north of this part of the park would be consistent within this part of the park, because then you know what it is that you're being asked to follow. So I would, if you're starting from scratch on some signage, that would make a lot of sense to do. And then I know we can't, especially because there's that wonderful Little League ball field that only has an entrance effectively from this path. The one that's right at
No,
the.
they've changed it.
You're talking about the ball fields versus the one.
It means the 72nd Street ball field.
No, I'm sorry, I actually mean the one that's closer to like 78th Street.
Oh,
The one that.
well, there is a gate on the south end, and that's what we're starting to use.
On that one?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, great, okay, good, okay. Then my larger point was to try, well, I guess we can't ban pedestrians from the upper inland route to the extent that we can discourage its use. I think that's very, very important for all the reasons that have been highlighted. I'm not certain I'm ready to say that we should abandon this as an idea, but I'm very troubled by all the things that I've observed there, both as a cyclist and as a pedestrian, in that the conflicts seem to be heightened, and to the extent that other park users have shared their concerns with me, they've done so in a animated tone, and so I'm taking that very seriously. I've used these paths for a long time, long before it was a mandatory thing, just because it made sense for my route, and because at that time it seemed like I was taking the path less traveled by and eliminating conflict. Now I'm walking right into it. And if you're familiar with it, you can plan for it. But I'm seeing a lot of city bike users who may be tourists who are not aware of, they're sort of led down 79th Street around the rotunda and into the park there, and they may not know what they're getting themselves into, may not be equipped. I see them, for example, walking up to the traffic circle. So these are practical, granular things. I'm still troubled by the overall persistence of conflict, just in a different location. And some of these things I think are solvable. The rest, I'm not certain are solvable or not, but I guess that's what I've got to offer. Thanks.
Mark, is this the signage you're talking about? This is looking north as you go up the hill towards the rotunda,
right,
and into the rotunda.
Right, but then I think there's one on the top of the rotunda that goes both ways.
So I've been out on the bike path a few times. I sent John a note early on with some suggestions where there should be signage. I remember very well the meeting with the, when in 2016 or 2015, when we discussed the, it was a zoo along the river. There were many accidents. I remember waiting one day for my son who was doing a long run and watching a woman get injured and having a long wait. There were near misses with little children running back and forth between by the boat basin. It's a major problem. This bike lane, the new shared road there are a lot of problems with it, but I don't think putting bikes back onto the main part of the waterfront is a good idea. I think we really need to explore some other areas. I know if I were riding a bike, I would probably get off of it and walk to the end of that area and then get back on my bike and continue my ride. Or I alternatively would go up to one of the avenues where there's a protected bike lane, like Amsterdam and running to Amsterdam, depending on where I was going. And I would plan that into my bike ride. And I stopped riding a few years ago when I was totaled by bikes crashing into me in Central Park, and then I started riding again when Riverside Park first, the southern part opened, and I stopped riding about 3 years after that because there's just too much craziness going on. I used to ride my bike to work. I've ridden my bike all my life. My bike has now been sitting in my closet for 5 years, and at some point, a grandchild or a niece or a nephew will be gifted with the bike. I think safety is really paramount, and I think, bike riders and pedestrians need to share better. And I would not support a resolution to reverse.
So now talking about the proposed resolution, I think we need not reach the question of whether we as a joint committee tonight have the power to either as a recommendation or as a mandate to reverse entirely and nullify the detour or the bypass. Whether we can undo a participatory budget process, project is, I think, a question we need not and should not reach tonight. What I think we have the power to do, I think, because we have the power to do it, because it's all about the details. The participatory budget vote did not create or demand or specify the details. And probably the single most important detail that I think we do have the power and did in 2016 when we took a very close vote and do have now, is the seasonal versus year-round aspect of it. And to me, the most compelling arguments about safety, which were made compellingly, I thought, at our full board meeting in 2016, are the issues of lighting and loneliness and tree roots and all of the winter, and ice, particularly also the wintertime concerns. So I'm pretty close to on the fence on that, but I think I might be persuaded to go for that part of Rich's resolution tonight. And I think we have the power to do that. But I want to just quickly relate all of this to a couple of other bigger picture issues about the Greenway as it goes through Riverside Park. One of them is that as Rich mentioned, he had a resolution that the Transportation Committee of CB7 proposed to the full board that was adopted, I thought, precipitously at our full board meeting a couple of months ago, asking for a speed limit in Riverside Park on Shared Pass, is how it ended up, I think. Probably a good idea, much to be said for it. It should not have been done. It should not have been done just by the Transportation Committee, as this committee discussed following that. And this discussion certainly illustrates anything about a speed limit, where and how for cyclists in Riverside Park ought to come jointly from the two committees. And I think we're not finished talking about that issue. And there's a lot to go on where that could go, whether it would work in what is clearly going to be, and always has been and always will be, the absence of nonstop enforcement and really the absence of routine enforcement. There can be occasional blitzes of enforcement, but that doesn't get you there. The second really big picture thing that is very troubling to me is the slopes at the Rotunda up and over. The Rotunda project, which we've spent a huge amount of time on over the last couple of years, is a DOT rebuilding in kind, this set of 7 bridges or 14 bridges, however you count it, exactly as Robert Moses planned it in 1937, when we had very few we had fewer recreational cyclists, we had almost no commuting cyclists, and it is being rebuilt in kind. And beyond even whether we have this mandatory bypass or not, what we have is DOT mandating as the access to the Greenway at 79th Street going over to the Rotunda and then up and down, depending on which direction you're coming from, north or south or from the east, those steep slopes. And we had several discussions with Parks Department and DOT as we were reviewing DOT's plans for the Rotunda about modifying those slopes to make them safer for cyclists, less steep. DOT's answer repeatedly was it was outside, literally outside the physical site of their project, and in any event, they didn't have the money. Parks Department's answers, which I found not all that persuasive, were that it's a DOT project, that it wouldn't be practical to modify the slopes to make them much less steep, because you'd have to come so far north and south of where they terminate now. And in any event, the Parks Department doesn't have the money, so it's a DOT issue. I don't find any of those, for the very long term, as we're looking forward to the next 100 years of recreational and commuter cycling by cyclists and pedestrian use and all the other uses in Riverside Park, I don't find those answers to be totally persuasive. I think it's the most difficult financial and physical aspect of this, but I don't think we should forget that issue, and I think we should continue to push it, because I don't think this bike path, whether it is mandatory or not, is ever going to be safe or practical for many cyclists when you have those steep slopes at the Rotunda. The last thing I wanted to add on this is that far more concern to me, and nobody's talked about it tonight, than the unsafe cyclists, the reckless cyclists, whether they are on the bypass or whether they're on the esplanade where they're now not allowed to be, is this whole new ration. They're not going away. They're increasing by the minute of motorized cyclists and scooters and all of these other motorized vehicles that are now careening by you in Riverside Park. They're going to be on the bypass. They're going to be, if they're not a cycle, they're going to be down there at the esplanade. And I don't have any solutions for that, but I think that we have to be considering all of those motorized vehicles as part of the big picture that needs to be addressed in figuring out whether this bypass, what to do with the bypass, whether it's the right thing. That having been said, I'm sort of inclined to vote for the part of Rich's resolution that revisits the seasonal aspect of the mandatory bypass.
Okay.
Can I just say quickly, I find it really upsetting that we would go about doing that, as I said earlier, 1 month into this, or a month and a half into it, when it was voted on at full board clarity very clearly about the seasonality. The other thing I forgot to say earlier was that somebody in the audience said that this was a transportation route. I'm sorry, I don't want to get the exact words, but it's a transportation route, and it's not, it's a park. And it happens to have a bike lane through it. So it's not a transportation route, it's a park. I think the Parks Department's in charge of it.
Can we just go around? Because I think all of us have follow-up questions. Okay, great. So I'm a bit concerned because as co-chair of this joint committee meeting, I feel like I was not informed that there was a resolution coming through tonight, Rich, by you. And I think Ken, if I'm not mistaken, because I do have a lot of tact, had knowledge of this resolution. So I'm going to state that for the record because I don't feel comfortable knowing that this was already pre-planned and it wasn't discussed. It sounds, no, let me finish. I don't feel like it's fair. I feel like a little side-blinded. Anyways,
Can I respond?
once I'm done, yes, of course. I want to say that Clary's stating that she would be in support of the seasonal part of your resolution. I would like to hear what your resolution is before we can kind of come to an agreement whether or not to have a resolution tonight. I don't think it's appropriate given that there is a list of grievances that the community has, that we have, and giving John the benefit of the doubt to go back to the drawing board for at least a couple of weeks to get his SHIT together so that we can figure out how to do this properly. I don't agree that we should be passing resolutions left and right when they have not come back with proper remedies. And we have not given them a certain amount of time to do so. I mean, again, the look back was 2 years. I think that's outrageous. I think we should be talking about this on a monthly basis at these committee meetings. But I do think I don't think it's fair that John is here staying for 2+ hours and not having the ability to then go back to the drawing board and try out some of these solutions that we've brought up. So my apologies for being very blunt, but I wanted to get that out. Doug?
I'll be very brief. So the one question I had was, Rich, on your resolution, are you suggesting in your resolution that the entire thing would be reversed and then bicycles would be back on the waterfront? Is that?
Yes.
Okay. So I wouldn't be in support of that, especially given the outcry. My own personal experience. I want us to think this is not only tonight, but all the time. Obviously, we've already said, I think we're all in agreement in this room, public and committee, that safety is always first. But I also want us to think about the concept of right-of-way. I am a student pilot. I am also familiar in the marine world and motor vehicles. There's a reason for rights of way, and the most vulnerable and the least maneuverable have the right of way. So I'm so glad that someone tonight talked about the elderly and youth who are the most vulnerable and the least maneuverable. So I just want us to think about that from now into forever, because there's very good reasons for right of way. And you can do research on a boat, on an airplane, driving a car, who has right of way. Pedestrians always have right of way, but I think there's even a subset of pedestrians which are the elderly and youth. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
If we went back to the way it was, it would be the situation that was in place when that little girl was killed, right? So,
She wasn't, she was
I'm
not
just
killed.
saying that sorry, harmed. I just think that, you know, to your point about, Central Park West, you know, we have seen the situation that we were in leading to a terrible accident, so. My other thing is about, transparency and process and procedure, and I feel like it's difficult to, make such a decision that requires so much thought and information. To me, it feels like on the fly. I also feel like the community wasn't informed of the fact that this could be on the agenda. And while I know that there are a lot of people here, a lot of people who might want to participate in the discussion, had they known that we were planning to consider a resolution to reverse that prior decision, it might have drawn a different group of people, or might have drawn additional people who might have wanted to participate. And I feel that going forward with the resolution tonight would exclude them from the discussion.
I'd like to second that.
I quite agree with that. It was not noticed that we were doing this. It was a discussion to have a discussion with Riverside Park. I want to praise them. They've been very responsive. The PEP officers have been out working hard. You're in a period right now, I understand, of educating people. Councilmember Rosenthal was very thoughtful in all of this. It's been a long planning process. There are problems. There certainly are problems, and I think going back to what it was would be the worst thing we could possibly do. I think we need to keep looking for solutions. Unfortunately, Riverside Park was designed not to be a bike path. It was designed to as a totally different kind of recreation and usage. So I think there's just a tremendous amount going on here, and I think to have any resolution come out tonight would be wrong. I think we've given John a whole long shopping list of things, some requiring funds, some not. Marissa has certainly been very helpful with trying to help with funding, and I think it would be best served if we just leave the shopping list and maybe have John come back in a couple of months when more work has been done.
Okay. So first, I just want to address Clary's point about the speed limit. I think my thought with the speed limit is right now there is not one. So it's completely legal for a cyclist to be going 20, 25, 30 miles per hour. And I think it's important to have a limit and to have it posted as a guide. Obviously, enforcement's a major challenge, but I think we need a limit on the books. I do apologize for bringing that up only in transportation, not in parks, but it did pass unanimously. And it also, to the point about other types of vehicles, scooters and e-scooters and all the others, the resolution was for all wheeled vehicles. Onto my resolution. Again, my resolution was just simply to reverse. Ken had mentioned separately that if my resolution failed, we could talk about seasonality. I do want to call the question for my resolution to reverse, which was seconded. It's very simple. My concern is that the slope is so steep that it's an existential issue that makes it impossible to make this safe. And while you can do some things around the edges, we've got this fundamental issue that cyclists can easily get 20, 25, 30 miles per hour going down those steep slopes. And it's an invitation to disasters. I don't think there's any point in spending more time on this. We've heard a lot of valid reasons why people might be opposed to it. If you don't like it, you're very welcome to vote against it. Even if it goes down 6-2, which it might, I can at least feel like I've done what I can do prior to this tragedy that I'm feeling is likely to be coming, unfortunately, sometime soon. So if you don't like it, I do hope people recognize that. I think Roberta says going back to what we had was the worst possible situation. I disagree. I think it's the second worst. I think what we have is even worse. And it's more likely to lead to serious injuries or fatalities. And it was definitely unacceptable. We have to do something. I think this is worse. And for that reason, I called the resolution. It was seconded. Should we do that? And then Ken can propose his resolution.
just make a comment because I think we get a lot of input.
We get a lot of input that comes into our office, and that you've certainly heard from one sector here tonight. And I think I've seen a lot of people that originally opposed the detour. They seem to still oppose the detour, same people in the room. I can't tell you how many people we've heard from in our office, bicyclists and pedestrians, bicyclists included, that really enjoy the detour. They think it's a great improvement. They like riding on the detour. Pedestrians like having the separation. And so I think it would be important for the community board, certainly before you even considered a resolution, both on seasonality and reversing the policy, that you give the community the opportunity to come out and speak to it, that there be more notice about this kind of discuss, this outcome.
In discussion of the new mandatory route, it doesn't say
But we often have items on the agenda that don't have resolutions called for.
Never something.
It's going down anyway, let's just vote. It's been seconded, we can't cancel a vote once it's seconded, can we?
I just want to propose one possibly Solomonic, friendly amendment, which is, would you consider this a friendly amendment if we made the new
bike route optional? And so down by the water, we still had barricades that said slow cyclists, 10 miles an hour or less, something like that. And then all other cyclists going this way. Would you consider?
I don't, because I think the fundamental issue is speed, and that's still allowing cyclists to speed on this diverted path. And so it doesn't solve the basic issue that even if it were to happen, even if we were to say you can go on this bike path if you go 5 miles per hour, we're going to have the people who are reckless riding recklessly on this dangerous path where they can go down steep hills way too quickly.
You don't need you have a quorum of
we have a quorum of Parks and Environment. Okay, I'm going to call the question on
One
Rich's.
more comment to make. I'm sorry, because I do have to be transparent, and this is in the spirit of transparency, and Ken and I are very friendly about this because we have discussed, but this committee meeting, this joint committee meeting was developed without my consensus. I never had input of whether or not this was a joint committee meeting. That was solely declared by Ken. So I do have to say that I'm here tonight, I'm being friendly, we are managing. However, I don't agree that this should have ever been a joint committee meeting. I think that we should have had more interaction with Parks and more interaction on our own to figure out how to come together, have an appropriate representation, as I'm echoing Marissa, of both sides.
If Marissa can talk, we yield a couple of points too.
No, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
It's not,
Just ask.
This is, yeah, Danny, thank you. This is actually,
From the council member's office, because we've been getting a lot of
Yeah.
input from the.
Danny, thank you. This is now closed to committee because we are about to call it to question. We are calling this to question.
We're going to call the question, and then after we vote on this, I'm going to say something about the seasonality resolution. Okay, all those in favor of Rich's? All committee members.
all
That's
committee
two.
members opposed.
All opposed? 4.
5.
5. Non-committee board members in favor. Non-committee board members opposed. And non-committee board members abstaining. So, as Rich foretold, the resolution failed. On the question of seasonality, I'm wondering if it might make sense, given that there is a question about whether the community was noticed about the implications of this meeting, that we put a vote on the seasonality on the agenda for September, and we publicize it, because I still have grave concerns about what's going to happen between, let's say, November and March, April. And I think that should be revisited. And that we vote on that at our September meeting, which is the third Monday in September.
That's not really enough time.
That's not enough time.
We have to change.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, it's bad.
Susan, can I will give you the microphone. I just wanted to say, Ken, I don't think A, that's enough time. B, I think we do need to give John and Parks the opportunity to come back and let us know their plan, since they have a lot of thinking to do. They have a lot of thinking and planning and a lot to work through. I don't think seasonality is the only issue here. There are so many other issues that need to come back to this table. So that's
At the last committee meeting, I asked Ken if you would consider taking advantage of the strong communication network that Transportation Alternatives has to communicate to the cycling community what's, the challenges that we face. And your answer was very exciting to me, which was that you have other priorities, you're saving lives. I found that really disappointing. I think we really could all work together here and try to educate people. Some of the stuff you talked about tonight, these are things that could be educated, things that could be communicated, and we could all work together to make the situation safer.
I just have a quick question, which is that a lot of discussion is given to the cold weather months and snow and ice, which clearly is a hazardous situation. It can be. So I guess if we do nothing, and this is just a general question, and we do have an ice and snow condition, what would happen? I mean, I'm assuming that if there's a dangerous roadway, it has to be closed. Like if there was icing on a particular avenue or something, what would happen if we have a very dangerous ice condition and on those hilly parts? What would we do if we make no changes to seasonality and a hazardous condition exists at that time, assuming temporary?
Speaking very generically, there are times when, after storms, let's say, or in the wintertime, when staircases, paths are closed for safety until they can be addressed. Speaking very generically, but that can be done and is done.
So you would contemplate shutting off the bike path?
I did not say that, Ken. I said, speaking very generically, there are times when parts of the park are not safe, and we will direct people away until the condition can be addressed. That's what I said.
For example, in a hurricane, when there's chance of tree limbs falling, Central Park is closed, I know Riverside Park is closed. If there's an ice storm, whole swaths of parks are closed. Not just one section, but the entire park.
That's right. Playgrounds are kept closed sometimes.
Well, to put it in the positive is that I think all of us assume a certain amount of risk in using any infrastructure, whether it be the roads, whether it be a park path, and so forth. One of the things I love about the National Park Service is that they very much assume that you're going to use your judgment, and they don't necessarily put a rail on every precipice. And yeah, some people might fall off it, but that's on us. So I'm not sure I want the Parks Department to prevent me from my own worst judgment.
Okay, so I think this should be two.
Well, yeah, I guess so. Try to put together a couple of thoughts. Well, I think
We could have, had we chosen to, based on the record we have, voted tonight on the seasonality. I'm glad that we are not going to do that because Ken is proposing we do it at a later time, whatever that later time might be. So we sort of have two choices about that. I think one is to let go through a winter, see what happens in terms of how effective the ice removal is, whether by that time John will have succeeded in getting better lighting. I think I'm very skeptical about both, very much hoping that he will succeed in both of those, but very skeptical about both of them. Because I know as a pedestrian and an exercise walker in Riverside Park, there have been winters where for weeks at a time, I haven't gone down to the Esplanade, the former shared path, because of visible ice or black ice. And I'm not very optimistic about getting it off of this path. But we can either go through a winter number one, see how it all sorts out and hope that John and his colleagues with some money from Helen and however, I'm not optimistic the money can be that fast either, can deal with the things that can be relatively readily dealt with. Or we can choose not to risk that winter and have a vote, whether it's in September or October. I don't see the point of November or December because we either have the full winter experience, I think, or we don't. And so I applaud Ken for not pushing it tonight. And I don't know that we have to decide tonight whether we will vote, whether we'll have that resolution in September or
have a discussion.
Or discussion, right,
not
have a
directly say
resolution. I think we certainly could have a resolution. We'll have had enough notice if we want to. But it's really up to the committee co-chairs to set their agenda. And I don't know that we have to set that in stone now.
Oh, sorry.
So largely want to second Clary. I think that we definitely should not vote on seasonality tonight. There's still time. We want to let John have time to plan for winter and anticipate what some of the issues might be. I do think we should leave it open, and I'm not clear on when we are or not allowed, what notice we do or don't need to give prior to having a resolution after we discuss the topic. So I do think that we should leave the window open and give whatever notice we might give to be able to have a resolution on seasonality. I do think that this overall is a clear and present danger. I think that there are also specific dangers that have been raised about seasonality that do need to be taken into account. And we should discuss it at a joint meeting, whenever that might be, in, I guess, September or October, to give enough time to reconsider. I assume that if we were to pass a resolution calling for it just to be a seasonal path, it's a relatively simple diversion where you just clear the gates for whatever months. So I don't think that has to be done, definitely not tonight, and we have some time to do that.
I just wanted to ask John, the rotunda construction is supposedly going to start in the spring.
That's what we believe in our hope for, yes.
And presumably what we've been talking about is going to be moot for about 4 years.
Reasonably, yes.
Okay, everybody here?
So then the question is, do we go through a winter
Right.
with it or without it?
Right.
I don't think we should be the ones to decide. I think we want experts to weigh in on whether it's a safe, but we're not transportation experts. We're not equipped to say whether this current bike path and the steep inclines.
Okay, so
Because I know I enter on 89th Street and sometimes on 91st Street. I exit the same way. When I'm going up to Inwood, which I do often, I'm going up much steeper hills and through much more desolate areas than I am here. So if there's a real issue around this hilly area, how do people get in and out of? How do you exit the park? How do you exit the park out of in the 90s and the 100s? You're going up quite steep hills. This is no different.
Teresa, thank you. So yes, I think, Rich, thank you so much for being flexible and understanding in your response about the seasonality. I really do believe that we need to come back to the drawing board as a joint committee with full notice for all members to be involved and to participate on this, because this is a serious issue. There are many serious issues, and I really want to give John the benefit of the doubt to come back with more substantial remedies and solutions that he can attest to either they work or they don't, and then we can figure out how to move forward with a resolution or not. I would say I would be open to having a September discussion. I heard from John and Marissa that's probably not enough time. I'm nervous that October is too soon, or rather too close to winter. So I do hear that is probably not the best idea. I would say that gives us enough time to post notice to the community Ken, I don't believe that we're having an August meeting. Nope. So I think that gives us enough time for the community to have enough notice to come, be present, share more thoughts, concerns, etc. And that's my feeling. So I would be open to that.
John, could we ask you to come back next, in September, not next, and, or somebody you delegate to, tell us, what you've done and how things are going?
We will certainly respond to all of the very concise and specific concerns that have been raised tonight. I don't know if I'm available on the third Monday of September. Actually, I think I have a conflict, but we're certainly going to respond.
Well, maybe Jeff or Ben could come.
We'll see.
Or Margaret. We'd love to see Margaret.
Transportation, we can maybe
Yeah.
move into the transportation committee date. We can work with you
That's
on
possible.
figuring out the best time frame.
That's a good idea. Okay, yeah, so now we're moving on to new business. So
My question is this, has anybody noticed the large barges that go up and down the Hudson with the advertising on them? I was just curious what the regulations are about that. A community member talked to me about it a couple of weeks ago and said, very concerned about this. It seemed to me like something the Parks and Environment Committee could look into. I don't know if there's any regulation for this or what goes on.
Legislature was, did it pass or not?
Right, that gets up before the city council, but I don't know that they have that much
No,
control.
it actually passed the state legislature.
Oh, past the state.
Yeah, it's, you know, the New York City EDC, was very concerned about it, but it's because it's in the middle of the
So Marissa,
waterway, it
is it a-
reaches.
is it a ban?
It's out of their
It's interesting,
jurisdiction,
yeah.
yeah.
Is it a ban, and if so, when effective? Because they're still doing it. We see it all the time.
Yeah, I think it hasn't gone into effect yet. I understand it could be a total ban. I don't know the exact timeline, but you know, I had reached out to Danny O'Donnell's office and he had sent me a response. I'll try and find it and get it for you.
So the
I'll
answer
try
is-
and find it right now if I can, otherwise I'll
Okay,
email
so
it.
it'd be banned.
Yes.
The other question I know, which is a similar thing, it's sort of related to transportation actually, it's about what about the, are there any regulations regarding the huge phosphorescent newsstand placards? They're, because across the street from regularly 71st and Broadway, there's one that's like sets the tenants.
If you reach out to our office and give me the exact location, I have gotten, it's a sort of private-public partnership. DOT's like rents the space out to a private company, So they will come out, they'll take a look at it, they'll try and tone it down to whatever is their minimum. But if you just follow up, give me the exact location, I'll ask them to go out and take a look.
Okay, thank you.
But no, unfortunately.
I just had a quick question or comment about the advertising. Just as a bit of full disclosure, I work with Homeland and with NYPD, and New York State or New York City can pass what they want. All they have to do is go literally 2 inches to the other side of the dividing line into New Jersey's waters, and it gets a little bit illegal.
Isn't it, I thought it's a Port Authority issue.
It's Port Authority, but New York State Legislature has passed a law, but
It's only on the New York.
basically
Oh,
the
it's
river
not
is split
joint.
down.
Oh, I
Yeah.
see. Thank you for that
You're
information.
It says the legislation will ban any use of floating digital billboards in any state navigable waters. It reserves the right for municipalities to make further regulations.
But so that's an interesting question, because we look down at the Hudson, it's halfway across the Hudson plus a foot. Is
Yeah,
that New
that's-
Jersey?
that's what I was just saying.
I'm afraid that the issue may be even more complex than that, because I don't think the Hudson is a state navigable water, even though half of it is in New York, because the other half is in New Jersey. So the whole thing is an interstate commerce, and that's why our friends at the Army Corps of Engineers will actually probably be the ones to handle this.
Is this commercial speech, so the First Amendment doesn't apply?
There are always reasonable time, place, and manner
Sorry,
restrictions.
can we-
Depends on the
People, Mark, we're gonna call the meeting.
On that note.
Thank you, 9:34 PM.
Thank you for
Thank